As our world has revolutionized over the past 50 or so years, so has our access to almost anywhere in the world. In the past, you would typically grow up in a country and spend the majority of your life there. However, nowadays, it's not uncommon to see people who have lived in multiple countries and cities all over the globe. However, study has shown that this can actually have a negative effect on people. Pretend you're me for a second. On paper, I'm Canadian. I look like a typical Canadian kid, Canadian passport. My parents have both lived in Canada. Yet I've spent 14 of my 15 years on this earth living in Hong Kong, a country halfway across the world. However, this year, I've moved to Vancouver. I found two recurring themes that came up when I was transitioning into the Canadian society. Although everyone thought I was Canadian, I didn't feel Canadian a single bit and felt completely Hong Kongese. So I wondered to myself, what does it mean to be Canadian? I also found myself completely not being able to understand and relate to people socially. So when we were given this task, I thought it'd be the perfect time to find out how other people who've been in my situations found their experiences. My driving question was, how do Canadians who have spent a large amount of their life abroad find their reintegration into Canada? Now specifically looking at people who spent the majority of their time abroad in Hong Kong. The first person I interviewed was my mother. My major goals of the interview were to find out what she thought it meant to be Canadian, and how she found the adjustment moving back to Canada this year, after all those years in Hong Kong. When I asked about what she thought it meant to be Canadian, she said, "For me it means that I have a safe and secure country to live in, that is multicultural and diverse. I feel that is something to take extreme pride in, to be a part of a country like Canada." I followed up by asking her, after spending all those years in Hong Kong, did she feel more Canadian or Hong Kongese? And immediately she replied, without a doubt Canadian. Growing up at school every day, we would sing "O Canada" in the morning, and it was ingrained in me from a young age that Canada is a place to be celebrated, and therefore I feel more Canadian than anything else. Later in the interview, I moved on to ask her about how she found the transition back into Canada this year, from a social aspect. She said, "I found it quite challenging. I felt it was so different from when I was there before. I had to adjust to a completely new culture. I know that sounds weird due to the fact that I've lived in Canada previously for almost 30 years. I found socially that everything from humor to just basic conversations were hard to be engaged in when I moved back." I took note of my mom mentioning how she felt like she had to adjust to a completely new culture, even though she had lived in Canada previously. I found out that there is something known as reverse culture shock. The next person I decided to interview was my grandfather. When I asked what he thought it meant to be Canadian, he gave a very interesting answer. He said, "For me, that's a very hard question to answer, due to the fact that I've spent almost all my life living in places other than Canada. I'm not too sure. In all honesty, for me, being Canadian is just something that it says on my passport. I feel much more Mexican or Kiwi than Canadian." So when I asked him how he found the integration into Canada, he said, "Well, I had a situation where quite a few of my friends from work in the past were living in Toronto. So immediately once I arrived, socially, I had people I knew to have dinner and drinks with. But I found that when I interacted with people I didn't know, and when I met new people, I struggled to create true friendships. For the first 6 or so months of being there, I really hadn't made any true friends outside of the ones I knew from past experiences. However, over time, being there, you're able to adjust eventually. It took a while to adjust to my new environment, but as it is now, I'm loving it."